Hi, this is part 2 of the series I'm doing on philosophy, and this one is going to piss a lot of people off because I'm gonna slaughter some sacred cows, so to speak. Let's just get this out of the way to begin with. I'm gonna blame the victim. I'm gonna blame every victim of every crime, including rape. So let's just start right there. And I can understand if some people get upset, but try and actually listen to the arguments, okay? Let's take a specific crime or a specific victimhood scenario. And because it's going to be the most triggering, so to speak, let's talk about rape. And I'm going to do that from a rational perspective. Rape is a crime in which what makes it a crime is the philosophical, or not philosophical, the mental state of two people. Now you think it's one. You think, because you were taught in law school, well, rape is, it's if you have sex with someone without their consent, knowingly without their consent, or recklessly, or whatever the standard is in your specific state, but it's the mens rea, legal term meaning the mental state of the perpetrator. Now we're the perpetrator victim, you've got this dichotomy, but that's not true, because it is not only the perpetrator's mental state, it is the mental state of the victim in that they do not consent. And you will find that almost every law where it is a person-on-person crime relies on the mental state of the purported victim. I cannot steal from you if you allow me mentally, if you consent to me having your car. It is not stealing if I take your car. I'm going to say that again. If you consent to me taking your car and I take your car, that is not me stealing your car. Therefore, it depends on your mental state whether I commit a crime. Now, that seems obvious. It should be obvious. It may offend, it may go against training and perceptions, worldview, but it is logically consistent and valid. Now let's go back to rape. One person commits a sexual act upon another person without that person's consent, knowingly or recklessly. We're going to disregard the mental state of the offender, so to speak, because once you have gained a proper understanding of perspective, we're not talking to them. I'm not talking to them right now. Most people are not offenders. They are not, they may be criminals because everything's illegal now, but they're not offenders as such. They do not seek to do harm or to violate the will of another person. There are some, obviously, but there are many more people who view themselves as victims. Victimhood is a choice. We've just covered that. If I come up to you and say, "Give me your car," and you consent, it is not a crime. It is your mental state. It is my mental state. If someone, say I'm arrested for making awful videos because I fly back to the United States and it's gotten to the point where you can't offend anyone or you're thrown in jail. So let's say I'm thrown in jail and someone seeks to have sex with me without my permission. Now I have a choice. This is where people lose their mind, but it is true. You have a choice in everything. First of all, once you're in jail, you have a choice. You can perceive yourself as a prisoner, as unfree. But that is not true. You always have choices. And this is going to prove it to you right now. Someone is going to have sex with me. Period. I have no control over that. What I do have control over is how you perceive that. Now you can either perceive that as rape, or you can just not tell that story. Okay, to go back into est. That story may not be helpful, and I would argue it is almost never helpful to view yourself as a victim. That takes away your agency and power. And you have power in every situation because you can make a choice. So instead, at that point, when I'm about to be raped, or someone is about to have sex with me to tell a different story, or to be more specific in my story, someone is about to... No, I'm not going to be more specific. I'm going to try and keep this family friendly as much as possible with these concepts. But I can choose to consent. And that doesn't mean any different action on my part. It doesn't mean any different anything. All it means is a change in my thinking. That's what consent is. It's a switch in your mind. It's choosing something. Someone can reach out to touch my arm. I can be frightened and pull away, and all of a sudden they have assaulted me. Or you can consent. You can allow them to touch you, in which case you're fine. It is just an experience. Life is just a series of experiences, and how you choose to integrate them into your consciousness determines your happiness, your well-being, everything. You can integrate that as a victim, or you can integrate that as a participant. Those are your two choices. There are no others. And what I'm arguing, and what I'm trying to convince you of right now, is that choosing to be a victim, first of all, it's a choice. First off, there is the actual consent that is a legal requirement in pretty much every law. In order to become a victim, you need to not consent. That is an action on your part, a mental action, yes, but an action on your part as the victim. Because once you choose to not consent, you are choosing to become a victim. Okay, that part's easy and it's obviously logical. Okay, so let's say that's already happened. Sometime in the past, you chose to be a victim, as you now realize. That doesn't mean you have to continue in that path. You can recognize that and integrate that as a non-victim experience, because once you have realized that you chose that, you can no longer be the victim. Period. End of story. End of discussion. Because once you realize you are an active participant in making yourself a victim, you can no longer be the victim. By definition, to be logically consistent, you can no longer be the victim. And that should be empowering to you. And that is the way life should be perceived, as I'm arguing, or that is my proposition that I'm arguing for, is that choosing to perceive yourself as a victim is a bad thing. And choosing to believe that you have no choice is a bad thing. It would be much more difficult to be stuck in prison if you believe that you're stuck in prison, if you believe that you have no control there, if you believe that you have no choices, if you believe that this is something being done to you instead of something you are participating in. Life is not something that is being done to you. You're an active participant. You are in every situation in which you're involved, and therefore you make that situation what it is. There's nothing in this world, either good or bad, but thinking makes it so, as Shakespeare wrote in Hamlet. And so this isn't a new concept, but people don't integrate that into their lives. They don't integrate that into a worldview that is more, I would argue, full So while this video has appeared to be all about blaming the victim, it is actually all about taking personal responsibility for your life and choosing the life you want. Because guess what? Once you've chosen not to suffer, not to experience things as a victim, you're profoundly free to experience the joy of life, to have those experiences, integrate them. You don't need to give them that story. You don't need to give them that power. Okay, now let's go a different direction. Let's take a situation in which there is no obvious offender, where there's no one to blame. Let's take an accident or something that happens that the person theoretically has no control over. Say your child is born with a mutation, a damaging mutation, but it is a mutation such that it is not reliant upon the genetics of the parents. Therefore, it cannot theoretically be your fault that the child is suffering. So you have a choice. You can view the world as malevolent. You can view a world of gods and demons, jinn, whatever. You can view the world as out to get you, that there's some reason. There's a reason this happened. So you take an accident like that. Most modern atheists who view themselves as rational would say, well, of course you cannot blame the world. You cannot blame the sky demons or whatever. That is something that it just happened. And yet, when it comes to person and person interactions between people, they want someone to blame. They want there to be a victim and a perpetrator. But that's a way of looking at reality, just as the religious person can view reality as and can view the universe as malevolent. They can view that child's suffering as there's a purpose, there is some malevolent force causing that suffering. You can choose to blame some outside force. You can choose to blame someone else. Or you can choose to just perceive and realize that that event happened, and then put a period after that. It happened, period. You don't have to add your story into it. There's something powerful in that people don't necessarily grasp. That you don't need a story. Events happen, you don't need a story for everything that happened. Now there can be a reason that something happened, but that's different than a moral story. And you can understand why something, like you can understand why a rock slide happened. It could have had to do with the rain, and the water was coming underneath the earth, and it washed out some of the ground underneath the hill, and therefore the gravity caused the entire story. You can understand all of that without giving it a moral story. Obviously, most scientists would do this. Now, you can also understand why someone chose to take your car without assigning a moral significance to that in your story. Now, I'm not arguing that society should not punish criminals. I don't know on that, honestly. I'm rather anarchistic in my political beliefs, but I don't know as that's practical. I don't believe anarchism is practical, but setting the politics and the actual legal system aside, there's what society chooses to do and what you choose to do. And you have a choice. You have no control over them. And that's a strong point. I'm going to repeat it. You have no control over any other person. All you can control is how you react, how you perceive what happens around you which includes what happens with other people. Therefore, you cannot control the person who is coming to take your car. You can only control your reaction to it, your perception of it. You can choose to consent to them taking your car. You can choose to not be a victim, or you can choose to be a victim. And that's really all there is to it. As Ayn Rand would say, and I mean it. In other words, I have lived by these philosophies that I am espousing and that I'm putting out there into the world for my life. I am happy, and yeah, it's worked for me.